Welcome to the Truth in Crime Case Files. Thalia Beckett had bright smile and infectious energy. She lit up every room she entered. At 27, she was living the life she had always dreamed of, a successful career, close-knit friends, and now, marriage to her longtime boyfriend, Camden Torrance. To the outside world, their relationship seemed perfect. Camden, a charming and successful businessman, had swept Thalia off her feet with promises of a life filled with adventure and love. Their wedding was a fairy tale event, and the honeymoon on a remote tropical island was the final touch to their perfect love story. But beneath the surface, not everything was as it seemed. Camden's love, though passionate, was possessive. His need to control every aspect of Thalia's life was something she had learned to dismiss as his way of showing affection. Friends noticed subtle changes in Thalia after the wedding. She became quieter, more reserved, and seemed to be constantly on edge. Yet, she never spoke of any problems, brushing off concerns with her usual bright smile. As they arrived on the island, Thalia hoped the honeymoon would reignite the spark that had dimmed since their marriage. The island was paradise, a place where worries were meant to disappear. But for Thalia, it was more of an escape, a brief respite from Camden's increasingly suffocating presence. The first few days were filled with the usual tourist activities: sunbathing, exploring the local sites, and romantic dinners by the ocean. Yet, the tension between them was palpable. Thalia found herself longing for a moment alone, a chance to breathe without Camden's watchful eyes on her. It was during one of these moments that she made the fateful decision to go on a solo hike, seeking solitude in the island's natural beauty. Camden, however, was not pleased. His protests were met with Thalia's gentle insistence on needing time to herself. Reluctantly, he agreed, but something in his eyes warned of his growing frustration. As Thalia set off on her hike that morning, she had no idea it would be the last time anyone would see her. The island's tranquility belied the storm that was about to engulf everyone in Thalia's life. By evening, when she didn't return, Camden's panic-stricken call to the authorities marked the beginning of a mystery that would unravel the dark truths hidden within their seemingly perfect marriage. The news of Thalia Beckett's disappearance spread quickly across the island, turning what had been a secluded paradise into the epicenter of a frantic search. Local authorities, resort staff, and even fellow tourists joined in the efforts to find her. Camden Torrance, Thalia's husband, was at the forefront, his face a mask of worry and desperation. He pleaded with everyone who would listen, his voice trembling as he described the love of his life who had seemingly vanished without a trace. Camden's outward demeanor was that of a devastated husband, his eyes red from sleepless nights, his voice hoarse from calling out for Thalia in the dense jungle. Yet, behind the scenes, a different picture was beginning to form. The police, led by Detective Roderick Pierce, began their investigation with Camden as their primary source of information. But as they delved deeper, inconsistencies in his story started to emerge. Camden claimed that Thalia had left for a hike around mid-morning, planning to visit a scenic viewpoint known for its breathtaking views. He had protested her going alone, citing safety concerns, but Thalia had insisted on needing some time to herself. According to Camden, he had stayed behind at the resort, waiting for her to return. When she didn't come back by sunset, he had grown increasingly anxious, eventually alerting the authorities. However, the resort staff remembered things differently. A housekeeper recalled seeing Camden leaving the room shortly after Thalia, heading in the same direction she had taken. Another staff member mentioned hearing a heated argument between a man and a woman that morning, coming from the direction of Camden and Thalia's room. These accounts, though not concrete evidence, planted seeds of doubt in Detective Pierce's mind. Pierce was no stranger to complex cases, having solved numerous high-profile crimes over his 20-year career. A man driven by a relentless pursuit of justice, he approached every case with a meticulous attention to detail. But this case struck a personal chord with him. The sight of Camden's tear-streaked face reminded him of his own troubled marriage, the emotional distance that had grown between him and his wife over the years. It was a distraction Pierce couldn't afford, yet one that he struggled to push aside. As the investigation progressed, Pierce began to uncover more about Camden's past. Camden had been married once before, a brief and tumultuous relationship that ended in divorce. His ex-wife described him as charming but controlling, a man who demanded absolute loyalty and obedience. She spoke of emotional manipulation, of Camden isolating her from friends and family, making her wholly dependent on him. This revelation cast Camden in a new light, one that suggested his seemingly desperate search for Thalia might be a carefully constructed facade. The image of a grieving husband was starting to crack, revealing a man who could be capable of far more than anyone had initially suspected. Meanwhile, Pierce also turned his attention to Thalia's background. Friends described her as a beacon of positivity, but they also hinted at recent changes in her demeanor, subtle signs that something was amiss in her marriage. Thalia had always been fiercely independent, yet she seemed to lose a part of herself after marrying Camden, becoming more reserved and withdrawn. As Pierce pieced together the fragments of Thalia and Camden's lives, he realized that this was no ordinary missing person case. There were layers of deceit, manipulation, and possibly even violence lurking beneath the surface. The idyllic honeymoon had turned into a nightmare, and Pierce was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. But as the investigation continued, so did Camden's display of grief, making it increasingly difficult for the authorities to separate fact from fiction. The search for Thalia was no longer just about finding a missing woman. It was about unraveling the dark secrets that had led to her disappearance. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the island, the search for Thalia Beckett intensified. The once serene landscape was now a hive of activity, with search parties combing through dense jungles and rugged coastlines. The local police, led by Detective Roderick Pierce, coordinated the efforts with precision, determined to find any trace of the missing woman. Yet, as hours turned into days, the hope of finding Thalia alive began to fade, replaced by a gnawing dread. Camden Torrance remained at the center of the operation, his grief apparent in every move he made. He was constantly at the search headquarters, offering to help in any way he could, but Pierce couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The inconsistencies in Camden's statements gnawed at him, each contradiction a piece of a puzzle that refused to fit together. On the third day of the search, a break came in the form of a hiker who reported seeing a woman matching Thalia's description near a secluded part of the island known for its treacherous cliffs. The area was quickly cordoned off, and search teams focused their efforts there. The discovery of a piece of fabric caught on a jagged rock, a piece that matched the color of the dress Thalia had been wearing, seemed to confirm their worst fears. The possibility that she had fallen or been pushed off the cliffs was becoming more likely. Pierce observed Camden closely as the news was delivered to him. Camden's reaction was immediate. He broke down in tears, collapsing to the ground in apparent agony. Yet, there was a theatricality to it that made Pierce uneasy. The detective had seen genuine grief before, raw and unfiltered, and Camden's display seemed just a little too rehearsed. As the search continued, Pierce turned his attention to the forensic team working on the evidence. The piece of fabric was analyzed, and while it was indeed a match to Thalia's dress, there was something else. Traces of blood found on the rock, though not enough to suggest a fatal injury. It raised more questions than answers. Had Thalia been injured and wandered off? Or was there something more sinister at play? In the midst of the chaos, Pierce received a tip from one of the resort's staff who had been too afraid to speak earlier. They had seen Camden near the cliffs on the day of Thalia's disappearance, arguing with someone who could have been Thalia. The staff member described Camden as agitated, his face contorted with anger, before he stormed off alone. This new information deepened Pierce's suspicions. Camden's image as the distraught husband was increasingly at odds with the emerging facts. The search for Thalia had become a race against time, not just to find her, but to uncover the truth buried beneath layers of deception. The fabric and bloodstain discoveries near the cliffs pushed Detective Roderick Pierce to dig deeper into Camden Torrance's past. He knew the time for subtlety was over. As the search for Thalia continued, Pierce focused on uncovering what lay behind Camden's polished exterior. The facade of the grieving husband was beginning to crumble, and Pierce was determined to expose whatever Camden was hiding. Digging into Camden's background revealed more than Pierce had expected. Camden's previous marriage, which ended in divorce, was rife with troubling incidents, arguments that escalated into violence, threats, and psychological manipulation. His ex-wife had accused him of being controlling and possessive, claims that eerily mirrored the accounts Thalia's friends had quietly shared. But Camden had never been charged with any crime. His charm and connections had shielded him from consequences. This pattern of behavior painted a stark picture of a man who thrived on control and crumbled when it slipped from his grasp. As Pierce delved deeper, he discovered that Camden had been facing significant financial trouble, debts that Thalia was unaware of, despite their shared finances. Camden's business ventures had been failing, and he had become increasingly desperate. Thalia, on the other hand, had a substantial life insurance policy, which Camden stood to gain in the event of her death. This revelation made Pierce's suspicions even more damning. Was this honeymoon a premeditated plan to solve Camden's financial woes? Simultaneously, the forensic team made a breakthrough. They had recovered traces of Camden's DNA on the piece of fabric found on the cliff. While this could be explained by their close contact, it raised red flags when considered with the emerging evidence. The staff's tip about seeing Camden arguing near the cliffs took on new significance. Confronted with the mounting evidence, Pierce knew the time had come to bring Camden in for questioning. Camden's polished veneer was beginning to crack under the pressure, and Pierce was ready to exploit that. The investigation was no longer just a search for a missing woman. It was rapidly turning into a hunt for the truth behind a meticulously planned crime. As the pieces began to fit together, the image of Camden as a loving husband shattered, revealing the cold, calculating man beneath. A man who might have orchestrated his wife's disappearance in a desperate bid to escape his own failures. Detective Roderick Pierce's relentless pursuit of the truth led him to a crucial moment in the investigation. With the evidence mounting against Camden Torrance, Pierce decided it was time to confront the suspect directly. Camden had become the primary focus, and Pierce was determined to get answers. Camden was brought in for a formal interview. The once composed and grieving husband now appeared strained, his eyes darting nervously as he sat across from Pierce. The detective began the questioning calmly, but with each inquiry, he slowly turned up the pressure. Camden's story, once consistent, started to show cracks. He hesitated when asked about the exact timeline of Thalia's disappearance, stumbling over details that had previously seemed clear. Pierce could see the fear in Camden's eyes, a fear that spoke of guilt rather than grief. Pierce then presented the new evidence: the piece of fabric, the traces of blood, the DNA match. Camden's face paled as the detective laid out the forensic findings. He tried to explain it away, suggesting that the fabric could have torn during a hike, and the blood was from a minor injury Thalia had sustained earlier. But Pierce wasn't convinced. The evidence pointed to something far more sinister. As Pierce pressed further, he introduced the financial motive. He revealed what he had uncovered about Camden's debts and the life insurance policy. Camden's calm facade finally shattered. He became defensive, raising his voice in protest, but the desperation in his tone only confirmed Pierce's suspicions. The detective had seen it before. A suspect trying to deflect blame, to weave a web of lies that couldn't hold under scrutiny. Throughout the interview, Pierce carefully observed Camden's body language. The nervous tapping of his fingers, the way he avoided eye contact, the sweat forming on his brow. It was clear that Camden was unraveling. The more Pierce pushed, the more Camden struggled to maintain his composure. By the end of the interview, Pierce was certain. Camden Torrance was not just a grieving husband. He was a man who had carefully planned his wife's disappearance, possibly even her murder, to escape his financial ruin. The investigation was now tightening around Camden, and Pierce knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came fully to light. The pieces were falling into place, and the image of a tragic accident was giving way to the chilling reality of premeditated betrayal. As Detective Roderick Pierce meticulously pieced together the evidence, one crucial element still eluded him: an airtight connection between Camden Torrance and Thalia's disappearance. The forensic clues, the financial motive, and Camden's increasingly erratic behavior all pointed in one direction, but Pierce needed something definitive. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A local resident, who had been on the same ferry as Camden and Thalia the day before her disappearance, came forward with new information. The witness remembered seeing Camden arguing with Thalia on the ferry's deck. The argument had escalated, with Camden grabbing Thalia's arm forcefully before she pulled away and walked off. This account contradicted Camden's earlier statements about their last day together, in which he claimed they had been at peace, enjoying their time on the island. Pierce followed up on this lead, tracing Camden's movements on the island with greater scrutiny. Surveillance footage from a small shop near the resort showed Camden purchasing a map of the island's hiking trails, a map that included the dangerous cliffside where Thalia's dress fabric had been found. This detail was never mentioned by Camden during his interviews, raising more red flags. With the witness testimony and the new footage, Camden's alibi was shattered. The image of a loving husband mourning his lost wife was replaced by a picture of a man who had meticulously planned every step of the tragedy. Pierce now had enough to move forward. Camden was arrested on suspicion of murder. The once serene honeymoon had turned into a nightmare of lies, betrayal, and cold-blooded calculation. As Camden was led away in handcuffs, Pierce couldn't shake the feeling that justice was finally catching up to a man who had thought he could outsmart the system. The courtroom was tense as the trial of Thalia Torrance unfolded. The prosecution presented its case with precision, laying out the evidence that had led to Camden's arrest. The witness testimonies, forensic findings, and the shattered alibi all pointed to a man who had orchestrated his wife's disappearance with chilling calculation. Camden's defense struggled to counter the damning evidence, but it was clear that the case against him was overwhelming. As the trial reached its climax, Camden took the stand in a desperate attempt to save himself. But instead of defending his innocence, Camden's composure crumbled under the pressure. The polished exterior he had maintained for so long gave way to raw emotion. In a shocking turn, Camden confessed to the crime. He admitted that the financial pressures had become unbearable, and he saw no way out. Thalia, unaware of the depths of his despair, had become a target in his twisted plan to solve his problems. Camden revealed that he had lured Thalia to the cliffs under the guise of a romantic walk, knowing the terrain was treacherous. When they argued, and Thalia threatened to leave him, Camden, in a fit of rage and desperation, pushed her over the edge. The confession was chilling, devoid of any remorse, as Camden spoke of the act as if it were a necessary evil. The courtroom fell silent as Camden's words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the darkness that can fester behind a seemingly perfect facade. The jury delivered a swift verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Thalia's family, devastated by the loss, found some solace in the justice served, but the scars of Camden's betrayal would haunt them forever. The story of Thalia's tragic end became a somber reflection on the hidden dangers that can lurk within even the most intimate relationships. With the trial behind them, the Torrance family and the small coastal town where Thalia had vanished were left to grapple with the aftermath of the tragedy. The media frenzy that had surrounded the case died down, but the impact of Thalia Torrance's actions lingered like a dark cloud over everyone involved. Thalia's parents, Marlene and Donovan Breckenridge, were left shattered by the loss of their only daughter. They had never imagined that the man she chose to spend her life with would be the one to take it away. The grief was overwhelming, compounded by the cruel nature of her death and the betrayal by someone they had once welcomed into their family. In the weeks following the trial, they found themselves reliving memories of Thalia, her laughter, her dreams of starting a family, and the bright future that had been cruelly snatched away. No amount of justice could fill the void left by her absence. The town, too, was scarred by the events. For years, people had believed that they knew the Torrances, a seemingly perfect couple who had chosen their picturesque community for their honeymoon. The truth shattered that illusion, leaving a lingering sense of distrust and unease. Conversations about the case became hushed, as if speaking of it too loudly would invite more darkness into their lives. Detective Roderick Pierce, who had led the investigation, reflected on the case with a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. He had brought a murderer to justice, but the victory felt hollow. Pierce knew that for all the evidence and confessions, Thalia's life was still lost, and no verdict could change that. The case had taken a toll on him, as it reminded him of the fragility of life and the hidden dangers that can reside within seemingly ordinary people. In the broader context, Camden's crime served as a stark reminder of the darkness that can fester behind closed doors. It was a case that highlighted the importance of looking beyond appearances, of recognizing the signs of manipulation and control that often precede domestic tragedies. Thalia's death became a symbol of the need for vigilance and awareness, not just within relationships, but within communities as well. The story of Thalia Torrance, once a promising young woman with her whole life ahead of her, ended in a way that no one could have predicted. It left behind a legacy of sorrow, but also of caution. A reminder that love, trust, and safety are not always what they seem. As the years passed, her story remained a chilling example of how easily a dream can turn into a nightmare. As the dust settled on Camden Torrance's trial, the broader implications of the case began to emerge, sparking discussions that reached far beyond the small coastal town. Thalia's tragic death highlighted critical issues that resonated with a wider audience: issues of domestic violence, emotional manipulation, and the societal pressures that can drive individuals to desperate acts.
A truth in crime case solvers. Interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Until then, stay safe.